Hey guys, welcome back to the Unwracked Podcast. I'm joined by my co-host Kyle Wilkes, and I am Andrew Barry. Today we got a good topic for you, but before we get started, I want to read a little opening disclaimer. This conversation is not medical advice. We're sharing our experiences and what we've seen as coaches in bodybuilding. Tren is a powerful, controversial compound with risks and legal implications. Anyone choosing to use it does so at their own responsibility and should do so with full awareness and proper guidance. Our goal is to cut through the myths, share stories, and talk honestly about Tren. So Kyle, you've been in the game plenty of years. You've done many contests. When did you first start Tren, and what was your starting approach? Why did you start it?
I started Tren because I was fat, and I thought it was a potent cutter, right? It falls into, you have the bulkers and then the cutting drugs. So that's kind of how it started. I would say prematurely used it. So what I mean by that is I didn't put the years in the gym or even cycles. It was pretty much like my second or third cycle I put it in, and at the time I was getting off the internet sources. Okay, a nap skier, I don't know if it's still around. If they're still around, God bless. Okay, talking 10 15 years ago.
Yep.
14 years ago, and I went to a typical test probe and Tren Ace stack, and that was the only time in my life I had side effects from something. And the reality is the test probe wasn't test. There was something wrong with it, which is weird because usually test is not faked by any stretch. Yeah. And I got nasty scarring, so I still have scarring on my chest because I got such bad acne that people would just, they slap your chest, hey, what's up? Or if you're barbell benching, and I would bleed through my shirt. That's how bad it got.
Damn.
And I also had the side effects from in the bed, we'll say in the bedroom, right?
Oh,
to where I was just like, what the hell's going on? This is crazy. So that was my first experience must be the Tren. But obviously, as I learned over the years, I think there was some testosterone lacking in the cycle. But that was my first experience, and not a good one.
Let me ask you though, were you doing it in a contest prep, or were you just like, hey, I want to stay dry, but I also want the benefits of growing at the same time? What was the scenario?
So when I graduated high school, I was about 175, 180, skinny fat. All right, so picture that, okay? Went to college freshman year. I think I gained about 45, 50 pounds. I was just fucking eating. And I got fatter, but I definitely put on some muscle in the process. I got stronger, okay?
Yeah.
Right after that, freshman year going into sophomore year, that's when I said, okay, I want to trim down a little bit and I'll do a little cardio. Never wanted to do cardio because the people I lifted with were a little more genetically gifted from a metabolic standpoint, from a physical standpoint, to where they didn't need cardio. They just trained their ass off and they look good. So I said, okay, let me try to get one up on them, throw in this supplement, see what happens. So not a prep at all. I was just trying to not be a fat ass, and I got some side effects.
Gotcha. I mean, I'll be honest, my first PED cycle was Tren. And I got to paint the scenario. This was back in 2001, right? So I just graduated high school. Probably not the right age to start PEDs in general, right? But I had been obviously bodybuilding from 12, 13 years of age. I'd been eating a meal plan that I'd written for myself. I'd been training very hard, etc. And I was playing some college football. The guys are big. The guys are fast. We had a lot of Florida recruits at my college, and I wanted to compete. But more so, to be honest, I really wanted it for bodybuilding purposes. I love playing sports, but it was always the weight training that drove me in more. But for me, it was a lack of necessity. There were no sources, like today, I feel like it's almost as easy as Amazon Prime to get your gear. There's 100 websites, there's apps, there's, a buddy knows a buddy. You put an order in, you pay with Venmo, PayPal, or Bitcoin, and you got your order within 2 days. It's amazing. That wasn't the case back then. Back then, if you, as I learned a couple years later, you wanted real cycle, you put your cash money inside a CD case, and then you shipped it to some guy, usually overseas, and then you prayed that you would get a cycle back within 3 months. And sometimes you got burned. I got burned a number of times. But anyway, my only access to PEDs initially was, I don't know if you guys are familiar with the Phenoplex pellets that they use for cattle plants. Yeah, so I lived on the message boards, and I learned how to make Trenbolone acetate out of these pellets. And my first cycle, honestly, it was only 2 90-milligram shots of Tren a week. So really good for shutting yourself down because I wasn't taking a testosterone base. And then I think 4 or 5 weeks into the cycle, I was able to get my hands on some D-ball tablets. So I'm using the worst cycle you can imagine, Trenbolone and D-ball. And if you can imagine acne, aggression, sweating all the time, bloat, that's kind of how I looked I put on a good 25, 26 pounds of muscle, but it's not the kind of cycle I would recommend to anybody, you know? Or let me ask you this. So after your first cycle of Tren, were you like, hey, I love this drug, I want to do it again? Or was it more like, because, you know, you mentioned the testosterone. Did you know, I mean, the Kyle now would know, hey, something's up with your testosterone. You know, this isn't, but did the Kyle then understand that, hey, maybe I'm not seeing what I'm supposed to see with the cycle?
I guess it was both. So I obviously knew there was a problem, and it didn't take me long to start to kind of use my intellect and realize my testosterone might be low or something. So I ran into a gym buddy. He said I can get some quality stuff. I said, okay, let me try again. So that was the goal in the back of my mind as far as the drug Tren itself, because at the time I didn't know what was causing the issue. I felt like I cut the cycle pretty short because the acne got so bad by like week 4 or 5, I just couldn't continue because I was watching myself develop scars. I never had acne ever in my life. But I remember at the time I got Tren cough a few times, right? I'm sure you've gotten it.
Oh, yeah.
And though it scared the shit out of me, to me, I was like, oh, this must be real. Like, this is a strong shit. I want this, right?
Yeah.
That was kind of the mindset. It was just a matter of a time and a place to try it again, just because I also did get some of the side effects that we'll go into later when using it. But, yeah.
Do you think your first experience of using it shaped any of the decisions you make today coaching, or was it like, hey, I need to use this compound 3 or 4 cycles myself before I really get an educated opinion on how to use it properly?
The only thing it shaped was the fact that it shouldn't be someone's first or second cycle, right? I think when I have beginners that are in contest prep for the first time, I try not to ever even mention the word Tren or anything like that.
I'm sure they do.
Most of them do, and then other ones I'm just like, hey, I don't think you need this. And again, I don't want to touch on other aspects of it, but I think it's something that's shaped my thought process on making sure you're ready for it. Because again, I had irreversible damage, and at the time, or now I know a little differently, I didn't want that to happen to someone else. You know?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. No, I get that. I mean, so speaking of coaching, you know, because we both work with hundreds of athletes, and I'm sure we probably had, you know, 500 athletes use Tren at some point over our careers. What's a general rule of thumb for like Tren protocols? Is it, do you follow, actually, let's talk about this. What was the rule of thumb for you maybe 10 years ago to maybe 5 years ago, and then how are you a little different today? So
10 years ago, all I had to base off of was just some research I would see on forums, geared up. You know, it was a Facebook forum, and then some other forums you'd come across that are still around today, Discords, things like that. And it was pretty clear the dose you start at least 50 a day. If you could work up to 100 a day, do your thing. So 10 years ago, that's what I would suggest for people. At least 50 a day, 75 next, then titrate to 100. Maybe the last 2 weeks, if you can handle more, right? And that was kind of the thought process. Now, in the recent 12 to 16 months, I start Tren at 10 milligrams a day. That is what I'll start at. And people are like, hey, did you like forget the 0? No, man, I didn't forget the 0. I want you to try it at 10 milligrams and just observe what happens. And most of the people, again, I get a lot of people that are advanced, so it's not their first time taking Tren. And also in our contemporary era, people like to take Tren at an early age, okay? But I tell them, look, you might have gotten side effects last time. What was the dose you used? Most often, they'll say at least 50 a day or 100 every other day. It's the same thing, right? And I'm like, look, let's just take 10 a day. Let's see what we get from it. Take more if needed. And the goal and what people are seeing, hey, when I actually take a little bit, I'm getting the positive effects of Tren without all the negatives. Yep. So to me, that's been a game changer for a lot of people. I have a very big time athlete that has dabbled with Tren over his career. I started at 10 with him, and he thought I was fucking crazy, but hey, it worked because we didn't go very high.
Yeah, I can totally echo that sentiment. And I feel like, okay, I think we're part of like that second generation group of coaches. Like the first generation coaches, like maybe like the Hanis and the Chris Acetos and the Milos and the Chad Nichols, those guys, right? And I feel like we're the second generation where we've gotten to see a lot of what they've been able to do, but then we've also had access to a lot more information that maybe those guys didn't have, as well as just seeing a body of work with the vast amount of clients. You know, the coaches I mentioned before, it seemed like back in the day they had like 5 to 10 clients at a time, whereas coaches today have anywhere from 100 to 200 clients at a time if they're a pretty active coach. Because I got to agree with you. 10 years ago, it was, minimum we're going to do 450 milligrams of Tren a week, maybe work up to 700, maybe even 1,000 in some cases. And I just kind of had an epiphany on myself, actually. I said, you know what? I'm going to do a really low dose cycle, and I'm just going to do a base testosterone of about 200 milligrams a week, and I'm going to do 15 milligrams of Tren Ace a day. I'm going to see what happens. And I was blown away at how my physique changed in the positive, and how the lack of side effects, meaning the Trensomnia, the famous Trensomnia, the keeping you up at night, just staring at the ceiling fan, wondering when you're going to be able to fall asleep. The ridiculous sweats you get at times, some of the mental issues. I never really had those. I always felt great on Tren. I felt like $1,000,000. But I do know a lot of athletes, a lot of clients, they're just like, I am not the kind of guy I want to be around right now. My wife's telling me I got to leave the house. My guys, they're talking shit behind my back. What are some of the other side effects you can think of?
So, like, how I always word it to people, I guess, in a perfect world, right? I always say, like, Trenbolone doesn't just change the body, it changes the mind. So, like, on the surface, athletes talk about the strength gains, dramatic physique shifts, the kind of progress that feels almost unreal sometimes. But behind that, the psychological toll, as you can relate to, right, can be kind of brutal. So I think the first shift is that aggression, right? So I feel like Tren shortens the fuse. Tiny irritations spark outlandish reactions generally, right? So even I've seen the calmest lifters turn into someone that I'm very surprised, to say the least, okay? Halo, similar, but different drug.
Very similar.
After that, I'd say comes what's popular talk about nowadays, anxiety, but it's truthful with Tren. So you'll get that restless energy that makes it hard to sit still, hard to relax. And then some compare it with kind of living with like the volume knob turned up all the way in life. As far as like paranoia, I think that creeps in too, right? So it could be something I remember when I was using a higher dose. Even my training partner, if they glance at me a little weird, it just like bothers me. Things that never made me feel that way. So, I see criticism from coaches. I start to think, I don't know, that it comes off different than it actually was. And I'll read it months later, and I'm like, there was nothing wrong with how this person said this. It's actually how they always respond. It's just me mentally, right? Yeah. And as you mentioned, I think the most prevalent one is at night, right? And it's not just the insomnia, but the sweating and waking up in a pool of sweat, needing to change your sheets and crazy shit like that. So at least those are the side effects that come to mind from personal experience.
I got one more. The Tren dick, which honestly, I could say that goes one of both ways. Like in some guys, it just shuts down all of their, we'll say, activity, and to the point where nothing's happening. And then other guys, it drives them into overdrive. Yeah. They feel like every hole in the wall they want to go hit. You've probably heard of stories like dudes getting in trouble when they start the Tren. They start cheating on their girlfriends, or they're getting into fights with their wives because they can't keep their hands off them. And then I see it the other way too, where there's a little disruption in the relationship because the wife maybe doesn't think they're interested in them anymore, because it goes the other way. Nandrolones kind of go one of both ways with people.
Yep, no, I agree with that, and like I think Tren's kind of like a double-edged sword, man. So on one hand, like an analogy, I guess I'll throw out there is like for every pound of muscle it builds, it chips away at balance, stability, peace of mind. And that's the part that no one puts in a training log or in check-in pictures, right? That you don't notice those things. So again, if you can use it without side effects, awesome. If you're getting the side effects, there's definitely a point of no return to where, hey, this isn't beneficial.
I want to run a scenario by you, Kyle, and something I've been doing for maybe the last 2 to 3 years is I start a lot of guys' preps off with Tren for maybe 4-5 weeks at most. Low dose. We're not talking the doses we were talking about before, 450, 700 milligrams a week. I'm talking like maybe 20 milligrams a day at most. And I do that because Tren's going to help with insulin sensitivity. It's going to help with nutrient partitioning. It's going to help with nitrogen retention. And it's nice when an athlete can see a little bit of progress when they start the prep, instead of going through that lull for the first 10 weeks before they really start to shed the layers of body fat. And I'm not saying I do this to try to trick myself or them into thinking they're in better condition than they are, because I tend to like to go the other way and try to make myself think that the athlete's more behind so that we come in shape. Do you do anything like this where you start athletes off a little bit earlier?
So 10 years ago, the answer is always You're starting with Tren from 16 to 12, okay? 16
Okay.
being the average. Over the years, I've learned that, hey, some people, they don't need it, right? Or I don't even want to use it with them. And then recently, now, there's a time and a place, right? So let's just say I have someone maybe starting a little bit fluffier than I want. I'll put it in for sure to kind of see that if I know the person psychologically, which again, I think the most successful coaches are very good at manipulating someone's psychological thought process when it comes to kind of how they perceive their body, the point of prep, things like that. So I will use it in those cases too, to where I want the person super confident, not worried that they're behind, not trying to do more. So I think it's, I don't want to say it's 50-50, but when I do use it again, it's going to be at a low dose. It's not going to be at 100 a day or something crazy to where they have side effects at 12 weeks out already,
Yeah.
But yeah, so I'll use it, and for the same reasons, right? It improves insulin sensitivity, but more so, again, it gets them ahead of the curve generally.
Yeah. It's funny you mentioned because it seems like maybe you were up on this a little bit before I was in terms of, for me, Tren was always a 6 weeks out to the show day. That was, and I never used it with people to start a prep. Like it was just, to me, it was like, no, Tren is so dangerous. But of course it is more dangerous when we're talking about those 100 milligrams or more per day, But no, I much prefer my protocols that I use now. So speaking about categories with athletes, right? From, men's physique, first classic, open bodybuilding, do you see a difference in, or at least do you program a little differently in doses, or is it really just a client by client basis on what you think they need, what they can tolerate, what's going to work, lead to a best look?
I'd say for many of the men's categories, if I'm seeking to have them dry and hard and much muscle as possible, I'm going more about the experience, how they're responding to it, mentally, can they handle it, then I'll put it in. There are people that I've done preps with where I used Tren for 8 weeks, and then they looked fine, and then the next time, every prep's a little different. This time I didn't put it until 4 weeks out. They looked just as fine, quote unquote. There's no difference. So to me, probably preserve their health a little bit, but it doesn't really change. I'd say from a men's physique guy, I've used higher dosages. Just if it helps the look, hey, you're getting harder from it, awesome, right? For some people, I'm sure you have a lot of clients that are very concerned with DHT in their hair and stuff like that.
Of course.
So if I don't have Proviron, Winstrol, the Masteron at my disposal, then I'm going to rely on what I can to manipulate the look a little bit. Again, is that my preferred approach? No, but I'm not going to lie and say Tren is not going to help facilitate such a look.
Yeah, for sure. And this also brings me back to something I do quite often now is, again, we're using such low doses compared to years past. I like to keep Tren in after the show, especially if it's an athlete where we really need to ride a decent rebound. And I feel like, hey, in the past, they might have blown the rebound because maybe we pulled the gear out a little too quickly. Maybe they just need a little bit more of a carrot dangled in front of their face to keep them going into the off season in a much better lockstep, And how long do I run it post show? It totally depends on what I feel we've done to their health throughout the contest prep, how long they've been on the gear. I mean, I can tell you there's been cycles where, or years where I ran an off-season cycle and then I just started into a contest prep, which is the dumbest thing in the world. And then I've done years where I did a regular off-season and then I took 10 to 15 weeks off the gear and then I started a traditional contest prep. But do you ever use Tren, say, bridging from, or I should say just post-show, maybe for a couple weeks, maybe a month or so?
Very rarely. I can probably count on two hands the amount of times I've used it. And in the cases, it was more the prep was over, but they were doing another show later on,
Yep.
right? So I just wanted to ride the rebound, keep them as tight as possible. And then in most other cases, it really depends on how long I've been using it. And I'm conservative, right? So shame on me. But sometimes if someone is 22, 23 years of age, I'm not keeping that shit in. Because, especially if it's your first or second prep, because I don't know what damage we did. And if you start to have any issues with your kidneys, of all things, that's going to be really problematic. So that's my thought process with it. Obviously, for a rebound, it's going to help if you can keep it in for a little bit, like anything, right? If you're not getting the side effects, of course. But it's not my preferred approach, but there's a time and a place for things, right?
For sure. And that actually brings up another idea in my head, because let's say you got a guy that, looking at the national level shows, he's in the running for a pro card, right? Let's say he did North Americans, knowing that nationals is 12 weeks away, okay? Are you going to leave the same exact compounds in place, including Tren, if they're using it into North Americans? Are you going to run it right through the 12 weeks, or what does that look like for you post North Americans, say, running into a nationals?
So usually I won't put things like MPP in for 4 weeks. I'm not going to put EQ in for under 6 weeks, right? So using this as a concrete example, 12 weeks, I'm probably going to pull the Tren out for at least 4 weeks. The Masteron, maybe I'll switch to a Mass D, right? And then as far as orals, usually I'll get rid of them. They're not helping the liver, right? So fuck the Winchell, fuck the Pro Iron, whatever. If you're on Anavar, usually I'll drop that, and then I'll reintroduce everything, right? So the Clen and all those things I'll put back in. But test, I'll ramp back up to whatever I had that person at their max. So usually, at least for me, I don't know about you, going into a show, I'm usually starting to titrate down the test if I bring Tren up especially. But yeah, that's kind of how I would segue. But by 8 weeks out, I'm approaching it like, hey, it's your first national show. You know, we didn't have one 4 weeks ago. We have to be on point, you know?
Yeah, I'm with you there. I typically will pull the Tren right out. I'll probably bring orals are gone the day after the show. You know, I think. And here's the thing. People think orals are this wonderful thing, and they are to elicit a look. But you're compounding and slowing the liver down. Eventually, you're going to slow down your ability to burn fat. You're going to slow down your ability to recycle estrogen. So pulling the orals is probably the number one thing you can do post-show if you're bridging to another show that's, let's say, 6 or more weeks later, right? But I find that, well, the athlete's already in shape, or they should be. And if you ride the rebound the right way, let's say they volumize 8 to 10 pounds, something like that. They're looking bigger. They're looking a little freakier. They got some energy back because hopefully you've been able to titrate the cardio down, up the food a little bit. I find that you really don't have to reintroduce the Tren until like 3 weeks out at that point. You know, it's almost like a sweet spot. It's like you got a shotgun and you've just like racked it and you're reloaded and you're ready to fire another round. And it's a lot easier that time if the athlete has been locked in like they should be.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. And I think sometimes with Tren, again, I use my own case study, right? In terms of one question I was going to ask you, which I guess I could save until story time, okay? But in one of my experiences, what I want you to remind me of, because I'm off the prep brain, but I have my dabbles with it occasionally. But I just want you to bring back up this instant of dosages, just because I have something that's a good segue.
Okay, gotcha. Well, okay, so actually I got another segue because we're talking about dosages a little bit. We're talking about, males, men's physique, classic physique, bodybuilding. Do you ever see situations where you're using it with females?
To date, no, I have not.
Okay.
However, I have not also worked with women's bodybuilders. Not that I'm opposed to working with them. That's not my forte of late, at least what my focus is on.
Yeah. Most
of women's physique competitors, I have some competitors that have used it, but again, I get to look without it. So why do I need it?
Yeah, I gotcha.
What about you? I know you have more female clients than I do.
Well, I think we're pretty similar, and what I like about us is that we're not one-dimensional coaches that just work with one class. We work with males and females equally, pretty much all divisions. I don't have a lot of female bodybuilders or women's physique, and it's kind of like when you have success in one division, you somewhat get typecasted into those divisions. But I think we've been a pretty good job of branching out to all of them. Like versus say like Cuts. Like Cuts is the king of men's physique. Right. I mean, what's he up to? 16 men's physique Olympia guys now?
Something crazy like that. So he's the guru for that.
Dude, that's ridiculous. Like if I'm a men's physique guy, I'm not reaching out to me. I'm not reaching out to you. I'm reaching out to Cuts.
Yeah.
He seems to have that down. You know what I mean? But speaking of females, I've had a couple situations where the female asked me, in a figure division, and a women's physique. And I said, okay, I don't really have a lot of experience with females using, so I did some research, and I came up with 3 milligrams every other day. Okay, so 10 to 12 milligrams per week. And I'll say this elicited a very nice look without any negative side effects. And I think the women would report the same thing. You get the same benefits that you get from a guy. The muscles got harder. Muscles got fuller, training, they were stronger. But is it something that, I would say all divisions should be using? Absolutely not.
No.
If you're trying to do a bikini show and you're running Tren and you got striations and your muscles have that hard, grainy, dense look, you're not going to do very well.
Yeah, no. And I think one thing you pointed out, and I think it'd be really valuable if the listeners want us to do a segment on the women's divisions, because you have a plethora of bikini pros. I have a couple. I have a wellness competitor that did relatively good, to say the least, recently.
Congratulations on that, by the way.
Thank you. But yeah, we can do a segment on women's PDs and things like that. But yeah, I think are hyper responders, right? So
Yeah.
you mentioned what I would consider 25% of the starting dose of a male, right? Pretty much 3 milligrams, even less than that, to be honest.
Yep.
Same thing with Anavar. Usually 5 milligrams for me. If you said, Kyle, take 5 milligrams of Anavar, I'm not even taking it. Okay, I'll be honest. It's not going to do shit.
Why
For a
bother?
girl, definitely works. Yeah, there's a difference. So
Absolutely.
it's, one thing to point out.
I mean, we kind of covered this, but is there anything you do to individualize protocols? Meaning, do you start someone on a particular dose that like that's your standard, and then you either ramp up or ramp down from there?
I'll consider the amount of muscle they have, their experience in the past, as long as I trust the client. And that's not to say I don't trust my clients, but if the repertoire you build, right, to where you're like, hey, this person has good feedback, they had good source. Sometimes people, unfortunately, someone like Boston comes to mind, okay? He was very open about his use. I don't think all his gear was real because he was taking some hefty dosages that
Yeah.
it's just too much if it was real. So you had to have some bug stuff. So I think navigating that at times, there's a difference, especially if you put Tren in, okay, guys? So I guess ladies and males, if you're listening, if you put Tren in and you change nothing else and you don't see a change to your physique, there's a little problem, okay?
Very much.
Something should change, okay? You for sure, your internal temperature, things are different. So sometimes people get bunkier, so it's very readily accessible now. But that's one thing to consider as far as the individual dosages. Again, if someone has a lot of muscle, I'll start a little higher, depending on where they are in prep. Again, if I'm not 10 out and I'm like, okay, let's put it in now, cool. If psychologically I know the person's used to using, there are some coaches out there, guys, that 16 weeks out, you're starting Tren, and then 8 weeks out, you're at Tren A, and your whole PED protocol is already programmed the entire time. I don't agree with that. And the reason I don't agree with that, that's not to say I don't want you to have things on hand. Why are we titrating the dose up after 2 weeks if we're getting fantastic results? Mm-hmm. If you're getting side effects, why the hell are you going to take more? It's not going to get better, right? So that's kind of my approach with it. What about you? So like if someone came to you, 250-pound bodybuilder, 180-pound men's physique guy, what does that look like?
Yeah. Well, before we go into that, I think everyone will know who we're talking about, but I just remember, I don't know, was it 10 or 9 years ago, seeing someone's cycle that someone had written out for somebody, and it was 20 weeks out. It started with 1,000 mgs of Tren E. And then the big change at 10 weeks out was moving to 1,000 milligrams a week of Tren A, which to me, that's just ridiculous and astronomical. But, yeah, I mean, so using those examples, I'm actually probably going to start both those athletes at the same amount. The 180-pound, classic or men's physique guy versus the 250-pound guy. Because like you, I want to see what we can get with as little as possible. So, and I'm sure, people from that are listening that maybe were past clients from 5 or 7 years ago, they'll be like, well, no, you started me out on 100 milligrams every other day. I absolutely did. A lot of us did. Yeah. But we'll say I'm wiser now, and I think you would say you are as well. I might start with somewhere in the 10 to 20 milligrams, just based off of, okay, what's your past experience that I know about? Have you been a long client with me for a while? Your muscularity level, how in shape are you? A lot of those variables come into play. And, and also, I always ask clients on their intake, what's your experience with PEDs? And really what I want to know about that is, what are the negative side effects you've had from gear? If someone says, hey, I don't want to use Tren this prep, guess what? It's coming off the sheet. I like to set up a 20-week out spreadsheet that says, okay, testosterone E, testosterone P, all the different compounds we might use. And I put some numbers in there, but I explain this is in no way, shape, or form a schedule. This is more of a template so you know what to have on hand for when we might need to use it. It's really just to allow athletes to prepare and have the stuff in stock should we need it at that week, But yeah, I'm going to start those athletes out between 10 and 20 milligrams, both scenarios,
Yeah. And I think it's funny that you said, because in the past, 10 years ago, because we've been coaching that long, unfortunately, like I said, 50 every other day. That's for sure the starting dose, minimal.
Yeah. I mean, it was almost standard in our industry. And now, I have definitely seen a shift when talking to other coaching friends, the similar stuff we're talking about, 10, 15 milligrams a day. Maybe we bring it up to 25 milligrams a day over the last 2 weeks, sometimes a little bit more, but rarely are you seeing dosages of 50 milligrams a day anymore. I think it's kind of asinine at this point.
Yeah.
All right, so let's talk a little bit about the mental health and the side effects. We kind of went into a little bit, but what psychological shifts do you see most often on Tren? You know, aggression, irritability, anxiety, paranoia, sleep. We kind of mentioned it, but give me a little bit, give me an example, maybe without naming names, of a client where you added the Tren in, and then you saw some things based off their answers or maybe their responses to you that made you say, hey, maybe we should lower this dose or pull it out.
Yeah, no. So I think the one thing I always look for, a red flag, we'll call it, is when the athlete, they start withdrawing from their circle, their team, we'll call them, right? So aside from snapping in moments that never used to bother them, usually what I see is like almost an obsession with how they perceive themselves or their reflection into fears of like being undermined. So I've had conversations where, again, it's the person looks at them a certain way and they're like, what's that fucking person's problem? And I'm just like, I'm sorry, what? And they're like, he asked me if I'm using the machine. I'm like,
that's normal.
It's really not that big of a deal. And then they're just pissed off the whole time. And I'm just like, okay, buddy, you know? And then a lot of the times, because I get pretty close to my clients, I learn about their spouse or significant other or their relationship drama. And it always heightens generally once Tren is introduced for many reasons, right? You touched on something earlier that I think was funny, but the cheating on the significant other, that becomes very prevalent. And again, it's not, I've had people blame the Tren.
Oh, dude.
Their girlfriend would call me, okay, and say, Kyle, like, is it true, like, he only cheated on me because of the Tren? No, I'll be honest, it's not because of just the Tren, okay? I might have enhanced the likelihood, but he was going to cheat on you, and he's still going to cheat on you tomorrow, you know what I'm saying? So it's quite comical when I see that be the case, but usually,
I think
like I said,
sorry to cut you off. I think it definitely lowers some inhibitions. You know what I mean? In terms of, well, I don't know if you've ever heard this one. This one did, like, straight guys, and they're like, yeah, dude, like, I just started watching this tranny porn all of a sudden, and I was into it. Now, me, I'm like, there's no drug that's changing anything in me in that direction, right? Or they're like, yeah, dude, I started getting into this, like, alien tentacle porn. You know what I mean? And I'm like, nah, I don't know what you mean, bro. Like, and don't explain more, if you know what I mean. But yeah, I mean, I think, what's the craziest Tren story you've heard? Not talking dosages, just what someone's done, you know, in terms of cheating or whatever.
I can't mention certain ones. The people will get upset.
Gotcha.
They even bring it up into the.
Fair enough.
I would say more so cheating stories, right? To where there was a time where I was close with a client, okay, and I knew he was cheating on his significant other. He was a client friend, and I would warn him, and I'd said, look, like, she's catching on, man. Like, you're doing it too often. Like, this is fucking crazy. You're training. They're training together, and then one's circling around the block. Like, this is not going to end well for you, man. We have a show. And basically, he calls me in the middle of the night. I wake up. My phone's always on, unfortunately. That does not mean to call me, people, please. But I get a call, and he's like, you were right. I fucked up. I went too far. And I'm like, yeah, it's like 3 o'clock. Like, what do you mean? And he's like, she caught me. And I'm like, define caught, because I'm here to help you. You know what I'm saying? So, like, and he's like, no, she, like, walked downstairs and, like, saw me. And I'm like,
downstairs?
So she walked in your house at 3 a.m. Like, he's like, yeah, dude, it was crazy. It was like I was in a movie. I was with the other girl, and I heard the door unlock. And I'm just like, fuck, dude. Like, you know, that, and again, it's the Tren, Kyle. Like, I told you I can't take this shit. It's not the fucking trend, okay? Like, you have a problem, okay? You've been having a problem. So, you know, that's one thing that comes to mind. I think I consider that crazy. I hope other people would consider that a bit wild.
Would you say that this individual might have already been a cheater, but the Tren made him lose some inhibition to where he was just more brazen with it, was taking more risks, was willing to bring a girl over to his house, and knowing that maybe his girlfriend, who has the keys to the place, might pop in at any time, whereas maybe in the off-season, he'd make sure it wasn't at his house. He would go to her house. He'd put some smoke screens up so that there's no way she could find out.
I think I look at it as a positive side effect of Tren. So what is the positive side effect of Tren? The confidence and drive you get from it, okay? Yep. It's like a psychological edge. So yes, you have more assertiveness in the gym, but you also have it outside the gym. So that sense of domination or fearlessness applies. So in this case, the person was already cheating. They were just very careful at how they were going about it and cautious. Then they just got to a point where They didn't give a fuck.
Yeah.
Plain and simple. They just didn't care.
Yeah. They put it all on the line.
Yeah.
Yeah. What, to try to manage some of the side effects, and again, I think our modeling these days is a lot more responsible and lower, but, we know that Trenbolone and other nandrolones can increase prolactin levels. Do you do anything to counteract that, or you just kind of ride it and let it roll?
So usually what I like to do in a perfect world, I'll get some lab work done, right? So I'll kind of start to see prolactin levels, because I think it's very obvious sometimes when someone takes like a cycle of MPP or DECA, where their prolactin and progesterone have gone, right? If it's consistently still elevated versus someone that doesn't have any problems, stuff like that. Also, for me personally, from my experience, I used to take AIs at a higher dose because that was the cool thing to do, right? No one cares about lipid profile or anything like that. You learn over the years, but I would always start to have a little bit of like a soft, what looked like gyno.
Yeah.
But it's not gyno, right? I knew it wasn't. I was taking my Adex. I'm like, I'm eating this shit. It can't be estrogen related. So that's when I started to learn a little bit more about hormones. And I said, okay, I have a problem. My prolactin's too high, right? Why is my prolactin too high? Probably because I'm taking Tren at a higher dose, right? I was on MPP before that. So that's something to pay attention to where, again, I won't put Caber in as like a preventative. I'll put it in if I notice that person, their levels, let's just say their prolactin are like 17, 18 on lab work already. Yep. I know that person's probably going to have a problem if we put it in, regardless of the dose. So again, I always use things as have it on hand. We'll be proactive in terms of being able to apply it if it's needed, not necessarily throwing it in day one, because it's just another drug that's combating things. And at the end of the day, I'm a believer in you shouldn't have to take like uppers and downers or put Band-Aids on things. Maybe you're better off just using it at a lower dose, waiting to the tail end to put it in, and sometimes just don't use it at all.
Yeah. I'm also thinking about some other protocols I've seen where some coaches just have these protocols written out. Okay, 3 weeks out, 0.5 milligrams of Caber a day, and then 2 weeks out, one milligram of Caber or bromocriptine or one of the other dopamine agonists. And then you get to that final week and they're taking 2 milligrams a day, and their body ain't working right. And when you do that, guys, when you're messing with your hormone structures, the body's not going to perform and peak the way you want it to. It's going to be harder to load glycogen. It's going to be harder to get drier. You have too many variables going on at that point. Saying try to use the least amount possible so you can use the least amount of secondary ancillary drugs to combat a particular side effect. Okay? All right. So what is the craziest trend story you've heard in your coaching career in terms of dosing?
1,400 a week, 200 a day.
I think we know the same person.
Yes.
Was it someone doing like Easterns or maybe Atlantic States like 7 years ago, maybe?
Something like that.
Yeah. And I think we all, when we heard about that, because, me and Kyle are from roughly the same neighborhood. We're part of the NPC Northeast, more or less. And, there's some big shows there. You got the Atlantic States, Eastern USAs, and a few other good ones. And I feel like there was a time where I remember hearing the story when I'm at the show that so-and-so was using 200 mgs of Tren a day. His coach, who's actually a pretty well-known coach for being responsible and a health-based coach, had told him to take 200 mgs a day, I think starting 3 weeks out or something like that. And did you heard that too?
Yeah, no, that's what comes to mind. And that wasn't the only case. I've heard it, again, because people see one person do it, and then that person tells people, and hey, I want to look like that. I'm going to do the same thing. That's not how it works, unfortunately, right?
I don't necessarily think it helped that person one bit that I'm thinking of, at least.
No, but at the same time, when people hear that you can get away with that and the person's still living and breathing, okay, I'm going to try it.
Yeah, and this is bodybuilding. We're always trying to push the gamut on PEDs, training, food you can consume, food you can restrict, how long can you diet for, all these different variables. So yeah, I think we've heard the same stories. If the listeners in the comments have heard of someone taking more, please leave a comment. Tell us the dose. You don't need to put names down, but we'd definitely be interested to see some of you guys' craziest stories you guys have heard about Tren. I mean, this is kind of the same, but what's the most reckless protocol? I mean, that was like 200 mgs the last 3 weeks. Have you seen protocols that were, and I mentioned 1,000 milligrams per week for all 20 weeks. Have you seen more than that?
Generally, I wouldn't say. See, to me, sometimes I don't mind the dose as much as I mind the duration, right?
Okay.
If you want to fuck off for 2 weeks, cool. You want to take something for 12 weeks? I'm going to take the 2 weeks of damage versus the 12 weeks of who knows what it's really doing, right? So there's a popular coach we know does very, very well. I've constantly seen protocols, they start Tren at 16 weeks out all the time.
Straight through.
And it's just like, hey, is that really what's needed? Is like, how do you know you need that? It doesn't make sense to me. Like,
well, because Tren is a multi-layered drug, right? It obviously is a muscle builder. It gives you that, and it also gives you that cosmetic look, right? There's a reason why we're definitely using it towards the end of a prep. It gives you that cosmetic look of muscle graininess, fullness, and almost, I hate to use the word conditioning because I don't think of PEDs like steroids as conditioning agents, but it does impart some type of a conditioning look. Like you take a guy typically who's just running, say, 500 mgs a test versus a guy who's running 500 mgs a test and, say, 250 to 300 mgs of Tren per week. The guy taking the second cycle is probably going to look harder, grainier, and in better condition than the former guy. Would you agree?
I would agree with that. Yeah.
All right, so upsides and downsides. At its best, what does Tren give athletes that nothing else can? Like what does it do that no other PED can? Or do you have a substitute PED that you might want to throw in if the athlete's like, hey, I don't want to use Tren. I didn't have a good experience.
So I would say the upsides, right, other than the psychological, which I think that really drives a lot of progress in life when the person's motivated and confident in themselves, is the performance in the gym, right? You're going to get that rapid strength increase, at least if you take Tren, ladies and gentlemen, and you don't get stronger. Again, that's a little fucking weird, okay? But you should get stronger. The performance definitely through the roof. Now, if you didn't want to take Tren, something like Halo I've used, that's definitely going to amp someone up. Generally, that should work pretty quickly. That's why you'll see like UFC fighters and stuff like that train with it. As far as other Tren, it's going to enhance recovery, I would say, like most things, and improve the nutrient partitioning, right? So it's one of the few drugs that I would say allow for that, in addition to the other benefits with the anabolic, right?
Yeah.
And then as far as kind of like you mentioned, or I touched on earlier, I alluded to, if someone didn't want to take the DHT derivatives, the Proviron, the Winstrol, the Mass, or they really wanted to use it at low dosages, you're going to get that little bit of the graininess, I think, and that drier look with Tren in. Again, if I have the choice between Mass and Tren, strictly for cosmetic purposes, Mass is going to take someone at 5% body fat and make them look fucking hard as nails. Tren will help, but at the same time, I'm taking the Master on all day,
Yeah, for sure. I mean, put it this way. It's kind of like, I'm definitely not going into a show without Masteron in the system, but I could, if there was a Tren shortage for God knows what reason, I would be okay. Now, if I had to pick a substitute, or if I wanted to maybe put a combination of things together, I think you could use DHB at a fairly low dose and combine it with something like injectable Superdrol to kind of recreate, and again, keeping, say, your Masteron as your base in your cycle with the testosterone, I think you could add a little bit of DHB and a little bit of injectable Superdrol to elicit the same look that you're getting from just using Tren.
That volume look.
Volumized but grainy at the same time. Yeah, for sure. So, coaching lessons and takeaways. What separates the athletes who thrive on Tren from those who self-destruct? Are there personality traits that you notice in people where you're like, I'm not going to throw Tren at you? Or, what do you think?
So just starting with the ones that I know are going to self-destruct, it's usually just, it's a telltale sign, right away, they always have problems with everything, right? Their hormones are out of whack. They don't maybe follow the diet very well. They're just erratic humans by nature. Someone like that, hey, it's not going to work the best. If you say, and if you were my client, Andrew, and you said, Kyle, I can't sleep at night. I sleep 4 hours. I'm just stressed. I don't think Tren's going to help you, bro. I'll be honest with you. You might think it is, but it's not. And I speak again from experience, as I mentioned earlier. I wasn't going to forget. When I prepped back in 2021, I didn't sleep. I never sleep. I sleep very little, okay? If someone's going to take it literally, okay? I sleep about 4 hours. I had a lot of chaos going on, and I started to take Tren. What started as 50 a day. I'll start a little bit lower, but it was at 50 a day quickly. I went to 100, then 125, 150, and I just tried to offset the fact that I'm not sleeping. I'm fucking stressed, and I thought it would help. And it wasn't. I was getting worse. My weight was going up. And I started to realize that, what am I doing? A, I'm burning through money. I'm very frugal, okay? And two, it's annoying. I'm getting Tren cough like all the time at that dosages, 1.5 cc's. I'm going to get it probably. So it's not one of those things where it was helping me. It was actually making my sleep even worse. So the 4 hours of shit sleep I was getting was even shittier. Okay. So when I took it out, I started to improve a little bit. And that's what made me start to realize I'm better with no side effects from Tren. So what can I elicit a response with at what milligram to where I don't get that trade-off, right? So finding that balance is important. But so that's my story, okay, my personal anecdotal experience. The clients, I think, that do well with it, they're very even-keeled. They're someone that they understand it's a time and a place. They're not asking me at 16 weeks out, hey, when can we put Tren in? I'm ready. That's usually, hey, man, you're doing this for the wrong reasons, right?
Yeah.
As far as other things I guess I look for, how they're responding. I always ask questions again, going back to what I said earlier. What's going on outside the gym? How's life? How's your circle? If you're telling me, hey, I cut my parents off, I no longer live with my girlfriend, I'm sharing stories of cheating, I'm going to consider these things, because at some point, though on one hand, I should just care about the X's and O's on the game plan and getting you to stage, I know there's an uncontrolled bomb right now, and if she catches you cheating, your life is going to blow up at 3 weeks out, and now it doesn't matter what diet I give you, because you're going to go off the fucking rails. So I try to consider these things past just, hey, I should use Tren,
Yeah. More of a holistic approach in terms of, can this athlete's psyche, mindset, physique, lifestyle in general handle adding a compound as powerful as Tren in? Because I think, maybe aside from halo testing and some of the injectable orals, I think Tren is by far the most powerful steroid that we have access to. Would you agree?
For sure, yes.
Yeah. I mean, I guess, and you said something a few weeks ago, and it put into words exactly my mindset when I'm coaching athletes, and that was ride the middle. Don't get too high, don't get too low, because every single prep has highs and lows. You feel like you're ahead for a while, and then all of a sudden you look at yourself and you're like, oh my God, I'm behind. Or if you're an athlete like I think you and I are, where you got to really drive yourself into the ground and really get flat, to where you're looking at your pictures and you're like, I'm not a bodybuilder anymore. I look like I'm a men's physique guy, Right. And we both compete in the super heavyweights, right? Which is not a look that you want, 2 weeks out or 3 weeks out, right before you turn the corner. But so riding the middle, I think an athlete that doesn't get too high or too low on themselves, or that can rationalize and say, hey, I know this coach has a good plan for me. I know he's thought this whole process out. I'm not going to let how I look today ruin this whole prep. And I think those athletes that ride the middle are the ones that are going to do the best. Anything else you want to add? Blunt truth. Something every athlete should hear.
Tren wasn't made for people. Consider that. Remember that when you're going to use it, right? It's not medically approved for human use. But just the mental side effects, okay, they hit as hard as the physical side effects. So, yes, you will get the boost and the performance. If you're not competing, in my opinion, if you're not trying to be a bodybuilder on stage, I don't think you should dabble with it. It's not cool. It's not safe. And generally, things that could occur when you're taking Tren are not fixable, right? If you make decisions and Tren is your cited source of why you did X, Y, and Z, it's not so simple as to going backwards, right? So I think the short-term glory, there's a long-term cost to it, and there's no safe dose. It's truly somewhat individualized. I would say the safer way to go about things, which is what me and Andrew are trying to promote, is starting at a low dose. You could always add more. Taking 100 in day one, and then you feel the side effects, you're sweating, you can't sleep, that's not great. And especially if you're taking Tren for some reason, that doesn't go away in a day or two. So now you're going to have some misery for a few days. So again, try to take, hopefully you take what we say and apply it moving forward and say, okay, let me start a little bit lower. Maybe you'll get the great results that we're talking about. Maybe you'll say, Kyle and Andrew, you're full of shit. I'm not really sure. I think I know the answer, but what about you, Andrew? How would you summarize it?
I would echo your sentiments completely. And, we're doing this for education. And I think a lot of the younger coaches out there that are starting out, maybe they've seen some of the protocols from 5 to 10 years ago that even ourselves were using. Throw that shit out the window. Listen to what we're saying right now. Start your athletes lower, 10 to 15, maybe 20 milligrams a day. Watch. You can always titrate up, right? You can always titrate up if there's no side effects. And if you think the athlete can elicit a better benefit with a little bit more. But yeah, guys, thanks for listening. I want you guys to leave some comments and questions. Please tell us some of your craziest Tren stories. I think we'd all, as a group, would love to see and read some of those, maybe some experiences you've had or your buddies had. Give us a like, give us a subscribe, share this podcast with your friends. And with that, we're Unwracked. Thanks.